Masechet Avoda Zara Daf Samechtet. The Mishnah teaches, Nochri shaya ma'avir im Israel kadeh yain mimakom lemakom. If a non-Jew was helping out a Jew to transport his barrels of wine from one place to another. So this is kosher wine owned by a Jew, and the non-Jew is the mover, helping him to move it and transport it. Now, if there is a chazakah, a presumption of supervision, then it's permitted. That means that the Jew does not have to be there all the time. If he's there all the time watching the non-Jew, making sure the non-Jew does not open up any of the barrels and drink from it, or stir it, or serve any of it as yayin nesech, for sure that's good if he's there the whole time. But he doesn't have to be there the whole time. He can come and go, he can take a break, go over there, come over here, and that's okay as long as there's a chazakah, meaning that the Jew might be there at any time. So he goes on the side, maybe he goes on and wanders off for a little, that's okay, because the non-Jew knows that the Jew might come back at any time, therefore he's going to be afraid and will not open any barrels of wine and will not do any yayin nesech. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer kedei shiftach et hachavit v'yigof v'tigov. So, however, if the Jew says, listen, I am leaving for a certain amount of time, right? I'm going to go, I want to go shopping in town, I want to go buy something, I want to go to the bathhouse or whatever. If he tells the non-Jew that he's leaving for a given amount of time, then that is a problem, because then the non-Jew is not afraid that the Jew will show up at any time. He knows, I have this certain amount of time, and if that's enough to open up the barrel and access the wine and close it up, again, then that wine would be prohibited. Now the question is, how long is that amount of time? So, according to Tanakama, it's the amount of time that it would take for the non-Jew to bore a hole in the barrel and then get plaster, seal it up again, and wait for the plaster to dry, so that if he goes and comes back, he won't notice that there was a hole there. So this is the top of the barrel is made out of plaster, and so it makes a hole. So how long does that take? I don't know how long that takes. Let's say that's 1 hour, right, for it to dry, and then once it's dry, it would be hard to tell that he made a hole in it. So if he says, listen, I'm going to that place and I'll be back in an hour or more, then the wine becomes prohibited, because maybe the non-Jew went and accessed the wine. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees, and he's more lenient. And he says, it's not amount of time to bore a hole, which is relatively little time, but rather enough time to open the entire barrel, take off the entire top, the whole rim of the barrel, and to make a new one and attach it and wait for it to dry. That will take a lot longer. Rashbag thinks that if you just make a hole in it and plug up the hole, it will be noticeable. We'll talk about in a few minutes, noticeable from the top or noticeable from the bottom. Noticeable from the top, maybe, because you can kind of smear it around and make it blend in. From the bottom, you can't do that. So anyway, Rashbag thinks that it's easy to tell. It's sufficiently easy to tell if someone made a hole in it. So we don't have to worry about making a hole. But what the non-Jew can do is make an entirely new rim, and that will not be noticeable, because since it's all new, it all looks the same, and you won't see that there's one part of it that is a little bit different color than the rest of it. Now this takes longer. Again, I really don't know how long this takes, but let's say, just so that for the sake of making it clear, that would take 3 hours to make a whole new thing. So therefore, if the Jew says, I'm going somewhere to that place, I'm going to the mall for 2 hours, I'll catch up with you in 2 hours. If, according to Tanakama, that's too long, because he could make a hole in that time, and therefore the wine is prohibited. We assume that the non-Jew did make it prohibited, but according to Rashbag, 2 hours, that's not enough time to make a whole new cover, and therefore the wine remains permitted. That is case number 1. Case number 2. Hamaniach yeno bekaron o besfina ve'alach lo bekapandriya nichnas medina ve'rachas mutar. The first case is the non-Jew is carrying the wine himself. The second case is where the Jew puts his wine in the wagon or a ship of a non-Jew, right? So he's taking it in his ship or in his wagon. This would be a longer journey, and the Jew goes on a shortcut. Since the wagon has to go on the major roads, and so it can only go on the big roads. And the ship has to go slowly down the river, whereas the Jew who's on foot, he can go around, he can go through the shortcuts. So if the Jew goes and in the shortcuts, and even if he goes to the city and he goes to the bathhouse, and that would take a long time to go to the bathhouse, he might be there for a few hours. But since he didn't tell the non-Jew where he's going, he just told he just went on the side, and the non-Jew doesn't know where he is. The non-Jew thinks maybe he just went on the side for a minute to rest. He'll be back in 1 minute. I don't know. Maybe he went for a long time. But since he might come back at any time, therefore, the non-Jew is afraid and will not touch the wine, even if it's in a boat. But the boat means it's near the coast. It stays near the coast or in the river, so the Jew could always come back on the bank and look and see into the boat, make sure the non-Jew is not touching it. So that would be becheskat hamishtamer and permitted. Im hodi'o shu maflig kedesh yishtom v'yistom v'yigob. However, if the Jew tells him, listen, I am leaving for a certain amount of time, then it will be prohibited, depending on how long it is. And the same machloket as before. According to Tanakama, it will be, what we estimate to be 1 hour to the time it will take to make a hole, to seal it up, and for it to dry. If it's clay, so it will dry and it won't look discolored. It will look the same as the rest. So let's say that's an hour. And Ashbag says, no, you're not worried that he's going to make a hole, because that won't be noticeable. Rather, it will be the amount of time it would take to make a whole new top. Okay, why do you need to tell me that if he's carrying it, that case, and also a case where it's in a wagon? The Gemara will ask why we need all these cases. But now we have a third case. המניח נוכרי בחנות, אף על פי שיעשיו נכנס מותר, ואם הודיעו שהוא מפליג כדי שישתום ויסתום ויגוב. למה שמעון גמליאל אומר, כדי שיפתח את החבית ויגוב ותיגוב. So a third case, another variation. If a Jew has a store, and he has wine in his store, and he leaves a non-Jew to mind his store, and the Jew goes out, even if he's going out and coming back, as long as he's going out and coming back, it's permitted. He doesn't say how long he's going to go. So he just leaves. I'm going out, I'll be back. And he doesn't say how much time he's going to be back. So then the non-Jew who's minding the store is like, well, he might come back in 10 seconds. So even if he goes and takes a long lunch for 4 hours, he goes take a nap, it's permitted, because the non-Jew thinks that he's afraid he can come back, the Jew can come back at any time and catch him with the barrel open, and then he'll get in trouble. So he's not going to touch the wine. That's permitted. However, it's going to Tanakama. If the Jew tells him, I am going out for 2 hours, and that if that's sufficient time to make a hole and close up the hole and wait for it to dry, then the wine will be prohibited. Rashbag says, no, a longer amount of time, enough time to make a whole new cover, let's say 3 hours. If it's more than that, then it will be prohibited. But if it's less than that, the wine remains permitted. Okay, that was the third case. And now, last part of the Mishnah. Haya ochel imo al hashulchan, v'niach laginin al hashulchan, v'lagin al hadul baki, v'nicho v'yasa, ma she'al hashulchan asur. Shal hadul baki mutar. If a Jew was eating together with a non-Jew on the same table, so the Jew invited the non-Jew as a guest. So when you invite someone as a guest, then the guest feels free to take part of anything that's on the table. Now, let's say the Jew left for a while, and he left some jugs of wine on the table, and also another jug of wine on a side table. This is what a side table might look like a tripod, so he leaves some on the side. The idea is that the wine that's on the table, that is certainly available for the guest. If a host serves you, and anything on the table, so the guest will feel free and make it available for everything that's on the table. So if the Jew leaves, that which is on the table is prohibited, because the wine on the table he was invited to partake of, and so the non-Jew will certainly partake of it and make it yayin nesech. So therefore, that's prohibited. But that which is on the side table, since the host, Jew, did not invite him to say, oh, take more from the side table. He's not going to do that, right? If you have a guest at your house, the guest is not going to go into the kitchen, go in the fridge, and get more food that he wasn't served. That would be disrespectful. And this is a respectful guest. If the host, Jew, before he left, he said, I want you to pour a new drink, mix as much as you want, and drink. In that case, that's an extra invitation to say, even if the wine on the table runs out, go for it. You're invited to go to the side table. You can go to the cupboard, the wine cupboard on the side, and take another bottle, take whatever you want. In that case, the jug that's on the side table also would be prohibited because the host invited him to take even more. And in that case, if there are other barrels of wine that are open, then they are prohibited because he gave an open invitation, take any barrels you want. So the barrels that are open, we have to suspect that the non-Jew went and took some wine from them and made them yayin nesech. But the sealed barrels are permitted as long as he didn't leave longer than it would take to open the entire rim and make a new top and for it to dry. What you notice here is that it doesn't give the machloket. It doesn't say the opinion of Tanakama of boring a hole. It only says the lenient opinion of Rashbag. But notice strangely that it doesn't say Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer. It just gives it as Sitam. The Gemara is going to address this and say that therefore halacha is like Rashbag, even though in the first three clauses of the Mishnah we have Tanakama majority and Rashbag minority. So therefore, if we stopped here, we would assume the halacha is more stringent, the 1 hour, not the 3 hours. But since in this continuation, Tanakama is not mentioned at all, and only Rashbag's opinion is mentioned anonymously, so that means this final clause is saying halacha is like Rashbag. And we shouldn't think, I'm just telling what the Gemara is going to say in a minute, that Rashbag is saying all this. Don't say Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, open quote, and then all this, close quote here, because if that was so, then this entire clause would be only the minority opinion of Rashbag. So we're not reading it like, the Gemara is not going to read it like that, but rather this is indeed a separate case, and it's said anonymously, even though it's the opinion of Rashbag, so therefore halacha will follow Rashbag. So we'll see that in a minute, but I wanted to show it to you here while we have the text in front of us. Now, the Mishnah said, as long as there's a presumption of being supervised, that you never know. The Jew can come in and out at any time, so he's always afraid. Now the question is, how long will that be? How far can the Jew go and still have a chazakah? כדתניא, הרי שהיו חמריו ופועליו טעונים טהרות, אפילו הפליג בהן יותר ממיל, טהרותיו טהרות. ויאמר להן לכו ואני בא אחריכם, כיוון שנתעלמה עינו מהם, טהרותיו טמאות. So we're going to answer this question from a parallel case of a Jew who is transporting tahor food. Maybe he's a kohen, or he's going to sell this food to a kohen, or whoever, anybody who wants to be tahor. Okay, the food is tahor, and the owner wants to make sure it remains tahor. Now, he hired some donkey drivers or some workers to help him transport it. They're movers. But these donkey drivers are ameh haaretz. Ameh haaretz are not so careful about tumah and tahara. And so we are afraid if you leave an Amma Aretz alone with the food, they probably will touch it and make it tameh. So the Jewish owner, who is careful about tahara, he has these goods and he wants to make sure that they remain tahor and use them, eat them betahara, sell them to betahara. So he has to stay and supervise to make sure that the donkey driver won't touch it. Now, does he have to stay there 24/7 watching it? The answer is no. He can come and go. He can even go as far as a mile away, and still the food is tahor because he didn't tell them that he is leaving. And so he just goes, or he didn't tell them for how long he's leaving. And so therefore, it's permitted. So this is a parallel case. And you see he says, even more than a mile away, which means he can go as far away as he wants, as long as the non-Jew, or the donkey driver in this case, thinks he might come back at any time, he'll be careful and won't touch them. However, if the owner told the donkey driver, you go ahead, I'll come after you, right? You go ahead, I'm going to come later. Then he says, oh, I go, he's not coming with us. Once the Jewish owner is not seen anymore by the donkey driver, that 1 minute later already we have to suspect that the donkey driver touched the food and will be tameh. Because once he's not in sight, he's like, oh, he left. Okay, so I could touch it. He's not going to be afraid. Now, we answered the question because the answer is, if he doesn't say that he's leaving, then he can go even very far away. So that chazakah is pretty strong. You don't have to actually be close by. It's only psychological to make sure that the guy thinks that he might be close by. Now we want to clarify this baraita. What is the difference between the resha and the sefa? Because the sefa here, notice, unlike in the Mishnah, he didn't say, I am going to the mall for 2 hours. He didn't say that. He just said, go, I'm coming after you. Coming after me, maybe that just means he wants to get a drink for 1 minute and he's going to come right away. Like, he didn't say how long. So why should this make a difference if he just walks away, or if he says, I'm coming after you? What's the difference? Amar Rav Yitzchak, Resha b'mtaher chamarav ufo'alav lechach. Rav Yitzchak says the Resha is talking about a case where the owner of the food, he had the donkey driver and the workers go into a mikveh and be tahor. That way, he doesn't have to worry if they touch it, because even if they touch it, they are tahor themselves. So it'll be okay. Since he made them tahor, that's why he doesn't have to worry. Even if he's very far away, it's kosher. So that's the resha. Now we ask, well, if the resha is in the case where the workers are tahor, then the sefa also should be a case where the workers are tahor, and therefore in the sefa also we should be lenient. So yachi sefa nameh. So the sefa nameh, also when he says, you go ahead, I'll come after you, then we should assume that the food is still tahor. And Ama'aris Makpid Amagaf Chavero. No, in the Sefa, we're worried that even though you took the donkey driver and you put him in the mikveh and he is tahor, but when he sees his friend on the road, another Ama'aretz, he's not going to be careful not to touch his friend. And that friend might be tameh and will transfer the tumah to the donkey driver, and then the donkey driver will touch the food. That's what we worry about in the Sefa. Now we ask, if you're worried about in the sefa, then worry about in the resha also. Okay, you dunked him in the mikveh, but maybe he will touch his friend. So this whole line of reasoning doesn't work, because whatever you say about the resha, you have to say about the sefa, and vice versa. Amar Rava veba lehem derech akarton. So Rava has a new answer, and he says when he comes to them in a roundabout way. That is what the resha is talking about. That the people are on the main road. The donkey drivers, the donkey is walking down the main road. But the Jew, he goes out on the side road. He comes back in a side road, and therefore the donkey driver is going to be afraid, even though he doesn't see him and back on the road, so as far as he can see, but he might come on a side street and show up, so he's afraid. Okay, if so, the sefa nameh, when he says, you go ahead, I'm going to catch up, okay, even if you don't see him behind you, you never know, maybe he went down a side road, because the donkey drivers have to go down the main road, but he's walking, so he might surprise them out of the side. So what's the difference? And the answer is, now if he says, you go ahead, I'm coming after you, so then their minds are going to be at ease. He wouldn't say I'm coming after you if he's coming in 2 seconds, right? You don't tell someone, oh, you go ahead, I'll catch up, if he means that he's going to be 30 seconds behind. You don't say that. Once he says, you go, I will follow you, that means he's going far enough away that he won't be able to see and won't be able to supervise them. And during that short time, it doesn't take that long just to go and touch the food. And so during that short time, they might touch the food. So if he says, even if he just says, I'm going, I'll catch up with you later, the food we assume is tameh. So now we're going to address the 3 different cases in the Mishnah. Why does it have to give all these cases? They're all basically the same thing. If he can come and go anytime, then the wine is permitted. If he says, I'm going to go away for a long time, long enough to access the wine, then it's prohibited. Why do you have to tell me either all three cases? If you told me only the first case of the non-Jew who is carrying the wine of the Jew, so then you say, well, we're talking about all cases where he doesn't say how long he's going for. So then, since the Jew can come at any point and see him touching it, so there, he's going to be afraid, and it's kosher. But if I didn't have if I only had the first case and not the second case, then I might think that only when he's carrying it by hand, then he's afraid. But if it's a wagon or a boat, then the non-Jew can say, you know what, I'll take this boat, I'll take it farther away. Or I'll take the wagon, I'll go in a different route, and that way I can hide from the Jew, and he won't be able to find me. So I might think that in such a case, that it would be prohibited, because he can go in a different way. If there's a boat, he can go deeper into the sea, and so it won't be so next to the Jew. I might think that there in that case, if it's prohibited, and therefore I need the second case to say, even in that case, it's permitted. And if I only had the second case, I would say, yeah, on that second case also is permitted. You know why? Because the wagon driver or the one driving the ship will still be afraid, because they'll say, maybe the Jew will come on a different road. Even if I don't see him, down the road, but maybe it's a different road and he'll surprise me. So he's always going to be afraid. Or even if he goes deeper into the ocean or farther into the river, but he's still afraid that the Jew might be standing on the bank, and he has good eyesight. He'll be able to see even further away, and he's still going to be afraid that he might be seen and be caught. And therefore, as long as there's intermittent supervision, the wine is permitted. But if I had the second case, but not the third, about the store, and I might think that in that case, the non-Jew minding the store might lock the door of the store so that the Jew won't be able to come and surprise him, and then he'll go do whatever he wants. He'll open some barrels and make yayin nesech, so that we need the third case also to teach us that we don't worry about that. If the Jew comes and he sees the door is locked, then he's going to get suspicious. Why'd you lock the door? What'd you do? You haven't had the wine? And so he's going to be afraid, even in that case, to lock the door and access the wine. So that's why we need each case. Each case is telling us another chidush, that even here, as long as the non-Jew suspects that the Jew can walk in at any time, then it's permitted. And this is what we rely upon until today in stores and restaurants, that you don't always need a mashgiach to be there 24/7, but depending on what kind of restaurant it is, it's sufficient to have the ability for the mashgiach to show up at any time. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Machloket b'shel sid aval b'shel tit dibra kol kedei shiftach v'yigof v'yigo. Rabbi Yochanan teaches that the machloket between Tanakama and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is regarding lime plaster, because lime plaster is white. It's white when it's wet, and it's white when it dries. And so that's where Tanakama says, listen, you can make a hole, and you can get this lime and lime plaster to cover it up, and it will look the same. So that's why Tanakama suspects that he can make a hole, and it's prohibited after the short time that it would take to plug it up with lime. But if it was clay, then everybody agrees with the longer time, because clay looks different when it's wet and when it's dry. And so it's easier to tell if you just made a little hole and stuffed it up with clay. So it takes a long time to dry. It's not going to look discolored compared to the rest of the rim. So there, even Tanakama would agree with Rashbag that the amount of time to make it to leave and make it prohibited would be enough time to make an entirely new rim. We challenge Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation of the machloket. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Chachamim, v'alo situmo nikad ben milma'ala uben milmata. We have a braita that expands on the Mishnah, in which Rashbag responds to the Chachamim and argues hey, Chachamim, why are you afraid that he's going to make a hole in it and stop up the hole? If he makes a hole, it will be noticeable both from the top and from the bottom. Now, what do you mean both from the top and from the bottom? In what case would that make sense? If the machloket is about clay, which we just said, Rabbi Yochanan says it's not. Rabbi Yochanan says machloket is regarding lime, not clay. But this baraita only makes sense if you say it's clay. If you say that the machloket is about clay, then it makes sense you can explain why Rashbag said that the stopper will be noticeable both from the outside, the top, and from the inside, from the bottom, because it's made out of clay, so it's going to be discolored. Clay, it looks different when it's wet than when it's totally dry, and so you will notice the difference. It's easy to notice, and that's why Rashbag says that. If it's clay, but if it's made out of lime, and they're arguing it's made out of lime, then why would he say top and bottom? And on the lemata, the underneath, yes, you can tell, because underneath you can't smooth it out. But on top, if you put some lime on top, and you stop it up, put it on top, and you smooth it out and blend it in with everything that's around it, then no one can tell from the top that it was opened and reapplied and stopped up. Nobody could tell, so this wouldn't make sense. This is not true. You can only tell from the bottom where you can't smear it around. So this baraita does not make sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. And the answer is Rabban Shimon ben Gamaliel hu de la yada mai kamri Rabbanan. Rashbag, in this baraita, when he was responding to the sages, he in fact was not sure what case the sages were assuming. So therefore he told them either way. He told the sages, what are you worried about? Someone making a hole in the top of the barrel? If it's made out of clay, if that's what you're talking about, then that will definitely be noticeable from the top and from the bottom. So the little bit of the baraita that we quoted was actually this part of it. Because clay is going to look different. It's going to be a different shade than the rest of it. That will be noticeable on top and bottom. So for sure, you shouldn't worry about that. I don't worry about that. And if you are worried that it's talking about a case where it's made out of lime plaster, and that's what you're worried about, well, it's true that from the top one cannot tell, right? And so you have a point there that from the top you can't tell if someone put lime and then you smear it all around on top. So you plug up the hole and smear it so it blends in with the area around it. And in fact, you're right, that would be hard to tell. And so maybe you have a point there that you should worry that the non-Jew did that while the Jew was out. But even there, underneath, you can tell. When you take off the lid, you look underneath and you can't smear it underneath, and so you'll be able to tell. And that's why Rashbag says, I don't think you have to worry about the non-Jew making a hole and accessing the wine, and therefore I say you can be more lenient. Rabbanan. Now, Rabbanan, in the case where it's lime plaster, how come, in fact, they are worried, right? It's true, since you can tell. If it's clay, you can tell from the top and bottom. If it's lime, then you can tell from the bottom, and then you'll detect it. The answer is, since it's not discernible from the top, the non-Jew is not going to think that the Jewish owner is going to open it up and turn it over and inspect the bottom of it. People aren't good. Once they open the barrel, they take the top off. That's it. They just throw it out, and they're not going and inspecting just in case how long ago, some months before, maybe someone made a hole and will be able to see if they did that. They're not going to inspect it so carefully. And so since the non-Jew does not think that the Jew is going to inspect it, he's not scared to make a hole, fill it up with lime plaster, and that's why the sages are stringent. Or it actually could be sometimes if they plug it up really well, firmly, then it could be not detectable at all. And so we are afraid that, in fact, yes, he can make a hole and fill it up. So that's why Rabbanan do worry that he will assume he can make a hole and he can get away with it. It will not be detectable. So therefore, it's prohibited in the time it takes to make a hole. But according to Rashbag, it's really hard to make a hole that will not be detectable, and the non-Jew will worry about that, and therefore will not make a hole. But if it's enough time to make a whole new rim, then he will do so, and only in that amount of time is it prohibited. Amar Rava halacha keraban Shimon ben Gamliel hoil utanan tzitama kevater. Rava said halacha is like Rashbag, even though in the first three clauses of the Mishnah there's a Tanakama that's anonymous, and then Rashbag, that's a minority opinion. So it sounds like it should be the opinion of Tanakama should be halacha. But in the last case, where it talks about we're about to read, it says only the opinion of Rashbag, and it says it anonymously, and therefore the bottom line, the end of the Mishnah that is anonymous, is the opinion of Rashbag. So halacha follows him. Ditnan. היה אוכל על השולחן עמו, והניח לגין על שולחן לגין על הדול בקי, והניח ויעשה מה שעל שולחן אסור ומה שעל הדול בקי מותר, ואם אמר לו הווה מזוג ושותה, אף שעל הדול בקי אסור. חביות פתוחות אסורות וסתומות מותרות, כדי שיפתח ויגוף ותיגוב. And so the last case of the Mishnah, we repeat it here, says that if a Jew is dining, invited over a non-Jew to dine with him, and the non-Jew is the guest, and he left some jugs of wine on the table and a jug of wine on the side table, and the Jew left for a while. And so that which is on the table is prohibited because that non-Jewish guest feels free to take he was invited to do so. And so he's going to pour that wine. But that's on the side table. He's a respectful guest. He's not going to go and take from the side table. But if the host said, mix more wine and drink more, as much as you want, then also on the side table will be prohibited because then he was invited to go and take even more from the side table. And if there are other barrels around, if they're open, they're prohibited because he was invited to go and get more. So then those are prohibited. But if they're closed up, it's permitted. How long? Only if the Jew left the amount of time that less than the amount of time that it would take to make a whole new stopper. Open the rim, make a new rim, and also wait for it to dry. That is the opinion of Rashbag. So if it's less than that time, it's permitted. If it's more than that time, it'll be prohibited. So you see here, it says setam, and it is like Rashbag. We ask Peshita. So isn't it obvious? We have a Stam Mishnah. Why does Rava even have to tell us that? Because I might have thought, as I said, when we were reading the Mishnah, it's possible to read this entire paragraph as a continuation of what it said right before in the Mishnah, where it said, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, and he says about the previous case, enough time to make a new rim, and then you can read this as a continuation of Rashbag's words, and then all this would be a minority opinion in his words, not anonymous. And so therefore Rava is saying, no, don't read it that way. The third case up in the Mishnah, period, that's it. That was the finishing case. Now, all this is not Rashbag's, a quotation of Rashbag, but rather anonymous. It is, in fact, the opinion of Rashbag, but it's said in the anonymous voice of the Mishnah, which means that this is supposed to be the halacha. וכי מאחר דקיימלן, כבתי דרבן שמעון בן גמליאל דלך האיש לשתומה, והלכתה כבתי דרבי אליעזר דלך האיש לזיופה. הידנה, מה טעמה? למות בינן חמרה ביד גוי. Okay, now that we've established that halacha is like Rashbag, that we don't worry about someone making a hole in the top, but rather only about making a whole new rim. So we're following the lenient opinion in that regard. So we don't worry about making a hole in it. And also, halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. This is from a few dapim ago, that other opinion said you need 2 seals for wine. Rabbi Eliezer says you only need 1 seal, because we're not worried that the non-Jew is going to make a forgery. If it's 2 seals, that's really, really difficult to make a forgery. So that you need for some things. But 1 seal, still, it's possible that the non-Jew can go through the effort of making a forgery. But for wine, to make it yain nesech, he's not going to go through the trouble of doing a forgery of 1 seal, and therefore 1 seal is sufficient. Since 1 seal is sufficient, and the rim is 1 seal, and we're not worried about making a hole in which would be easier to do, but it would be harder to cover up. So we're not worried about that. Therefore, nowadays, why don't the Jews place their wine in the possession of non-Jews to hold on to for them or to transport for them? Why we shouldn't have to worry, because the rim itself is one seal, and we followed Rabbi Eliezer that one seal is sufficient. So how come, since that's the halacha, according to lenient opinion on both of these counts, we should be permitted to hand over sealed barrels to non-Jews, and we assume that it's still kosher? And the answer is mishum shaycha, because of a bunghole. That's a small hole that you use just to smell the wine. You could put a little straw inside, and it's not the usual way of getting wine out, but it's possible to do that. So even though you're right, we're not worried that the non-Jew is going to open up the whole cover and destroy the seal, that is the seal, and make a new one. He's not going to go through the trouble, but he still may stick a little straw and get some wine out of the straw through that bunghole, and that is what we're worried about. So it is a smaller worry than what the other opinions were worried about, but still, since there's some worry, we do not store the Jewish wine in the hands of non-Jews. Amar Rava, Zona Goya, V'Yisrael Mesubin Esla, Chamra Share, Nida Takif Lehu Yisra, Da Avera, Yisra De Nesech La Takif Lehu. Rava teaches that if there is a non-Jewish prostitute that's sitting around a table and eating together with some Jews. Now, what are these Jews doing? Dining with a non-Jewish zona? So already means these Jews are not such upstanding people, and they're having wine, and they're drinking wine together. Okay, makes the scene look even worse. And that wine is still kosher. In other words, we do not worry that this zona, goya, is going to touch the wine. Why don't we worry about it? Because even though these Jewish gentlemen have a passion for sinning with the zona, that's why the zona is there. So they can't control their passion for sin with the zona, but still their passion for yayin nesech, that will not overwhelm their judgment. So therefore, these Jews who are sitting around, they're having a meal, they're dining with a zona. So they will be careful for yayin nesech. And if the zona tries to touch the wine, they say, oh, no, don't touch the wine. You're going to make it not kosher. So this is a really hypocritical bunch of people here, that they're very careful about this drabanan yayin nesech. But when it comes to sitting with the zona, we can't help ourselves. And this is very ironic, because at least one of the major explanations for yayin nesech, why it's a law in the first place and why the rabbis were so stringent about it, is in fact to keep from socializing, so that it won't lead to mixed dancing, and precisely this, Jewish men being with a non-Jewish woman. And so the whole point, one of the points of this prohibition is in fact to keep them away. And so now you have the wine there, and they're very careful about this dirabanan. Oh, wine, we're not going to have any non-kosher wine. Maybe the zona had intention when she moved the wine that she made it to idolatry. Maybe not. That they're really worried about, that ritual aspect, but being with the zona, that they don't care about. But that sometimes is the reality of people's psychology, and so therefore that wine is permitted. On the other hand, zona Yisraelit v'goyim misubin chamra asur ma'itama ho'il v'zila alayhu batrayhu gerira. If you have a Jewish zona, and there are non-Jewish men who are sitting with her, and she wants to drink the wine. All right, again, here, she is a zona, unfortunately, very sad, but she does want to drink the wine, and she wants to keep kosher. Okay, she eats kosher, even though she is a zona. That wine is prohibited, because the non-Jews, that are the men that are around, are going to pour the wine, so she cannot have it. Why? Because they are not going to respect her. Generally, if you have a non-Jew with a Jew, and the non-Jew is respectful of the Jew, then the non-Jew will say, I'm not going to touch your wine. I'm not going to pour it, because the non-Jew knows that will make it prohibited to the Jew. So usually, if they have respect for the Jew, they won't touch it. But here, since this zona, she's a zona, they're treating her like a zona. So since she is contemptible in their eyes, and she is lower than them, so they're not going to respect her rights to have kosher wine, and therefore they will pour the wine and without consideration for her. So in that case, the wine is not kosher. Fascinating laws. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.